We're back on the record. In 14 CR 1432, Mr. Jones appears in custody, represented by Ms. Smith, Mr. Colvin, and Mr. Rubenstein, and Mr. Wade are both here for the people. Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you, Your Honor. Judge, we're going to have one short witness first, named Michael Young, and then after that we're going to be doing a stipulation regarding to Sarah Sanford. If the court recalls, she's the one who called in 911 about receiving the fire. So if I can approach, I have a copy for the court and 14 copies for the jury.
Thank you, yes. Are we ready for our jury, Mr. Rubenstein?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Smith?
Oh, yes, we're ready.
We're ready? Okay, sorry, I thought you were standing to address the court. No worries. I'll go ahead and call for our jury. Joanne, we're ready for the jury. Thank you so much. For our jury. Thank you. Please be seated. For the record, our jury has now joined us back in the courtroom. Welcome back, and we're ready for the people's next witness, Mr. Waite, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people would call Michael Young to the stand.
So, Mr. Young, if you'll just be careful of this black cord, and I'll give you an oath whenever you're ready. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, thank you. Sir, if you have a seat in the green chair by the microphone, please. Thank you. You can proceed whenever you're ready, Mr. Wade. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Young.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
Michael Young, Y-O-U-N-G,
Mr. Young, where do you live?
Brighton, Colorado.
And where do you work?
I work for EBCO General Contractors.
Did you once live here in the Grand Junction, Montrose area?
I lived in Montrose, yes.
Okay. And when was that?
I was born and raised in Montrose, and I moved away for a couple of years, 98, 99s, and then moved back until 2010.
Okay. So you were living in this area, in the Montrose area, in July of 2007?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And did you sometimes travel back and forth from Grand Junction to Delta and to Montrose?
I did. I owned a business in Montrose, and a lot of the products that I sold I picked up in Grand Junction, so some weeks, several times a week, I would drive that road.
And when you traveled from in between those towns, what highway did you use?
Highway 50.
Highway 50? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, was there a time on July 2nd, 2007, when you pulled over, found something on the ground, and called law enforcement about it?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
I was pulling a trailer down, and I typically try to stop just south of Whitewater. There's a white spot there. And a lot of times if I had my trailer on, especially when it was hot, I would pull over and check my tires and stuff before I dropped into Grand Junction, went and did my business. And I pulled over there, walked around my trailer. When I came around towards the front of my truck, I saw something laying at the edge of the road in the grass and the weeds there. And yeah, that was a check. And I picked it up, and as I picked it up, I noticed a few other things laying on the ground. I picked up some other stuff as well.
A couple of deposit slips, I think
Yes.
is what, okay. What made you call on, you picked up the check and you picked up these deposit slips. What did you do with them? Did you keep
Well,
them?
I got back in the truck because I thought, you know, if it were me and I lost a check, I'd want somebody to return it to me. As I got back into the truck, I was reading the name to see if there was somebody to contact. And I recognized the first name, but not the last name of what I'd been hearing on the radio.
Okay, and the first name on the check was?
Page.
Page, okay. So did you call law enforcement about finding those items?
I did,
And-
immediately.
Okay. Did you return those, did you give those items to law enforcement at some point?
I called and spoke to the dispatch and let them know what I had, and they had an investigator call me back. By the time he called me back, I'd done my business in Grand Junction, and I was headed back towards Montrose. In that discussion, he and I said I would turn around. He said, no, I'll come get them from you, and I proceeded on to Montrose that day.
And was the person you talked to Investigator Ellers?
Yes, that's the name.
Okay. Were you able to turn the items over to Investigator Ellers later?
Yes.
When did you meet up with him? Do you remember?
I do not remember exactly. That was the 4th of July weekend, and I believe 4th of July fell middle of that week or towards the end of that week. And my wife and I, and our kids, we left town for the 4th of July weekend.
And do you think it was after that that you actually
It
turned
was
them over
after
to him? Okay. Before that, though, you had discussed what you had found with dispatch and relayed all that information to them?
Yes.
Okay. And you indicated that you had found these items, they were on the roadside, kind of just south of Whitewater,
Yes.
and just off the highway on Highway 50?
Yes, on the west side.
Okay. When you finally turned them over to law enforcement, did they have you do some fingerprints as a result of you
They
picking
did. They had me come down to the next time I was in Grand Junction, I gave prints.
Okay. Because you had handled the check and the deposit slips?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Nothing else, Judge?
Mr. Colvin, cross-examination, please. You're welcome.
Morning, sir.
Good morning.
So Highway 50 in this area gets weird because it's either north-south or west-east, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
So we're clear, you're heading from Montrose to Grand Junction when you stop to check your tire, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so that means, I'm assuming you travel on the side of the road heading towards Grand Junction when
Yes,
you're going to Grand Junction, right?
Yes, sir.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
And when you stop to check your tire, you pull off to the side of the road, not on the median side, but on the other side, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this check you find is on the side of the road that you would be on if you were heading towards Grand Junction, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Not on the side of the road it would be on if you were heading towards Delta, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you called this in because you recognize the name. You recognize the name as somebody who's missing, right?
Yes, there was a lot of radio coverage at that time.
Okay. In fact, you had no idea who Paige Bergfeld was, but for the fact that she's all over the TV and newspaper, right?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, the media coverage was so prevalent about her at that time that coincidentally you find this check and you hear her name and them talking about her being missing on the radio on this same trip up to Grand Junction, right?
Within just a few minutes
Okay.
of getting back in the truck.
So you listening to the radio in the Grand Junction area in July of 2007, you're going to hear her name. That's your experience, right?
Yes.
Okay. And of course, recognizing that it possibly is the same lady, you call law enforcement right away, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And they took it serious, they took your information seriously enough to find out where you found it, right?
Yes.
They got a description of the location where you located it, right?
Yes, sir.
But they said no big deal now on picking up the check. You head on down to Montrose, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because you were willing to turn around. You'd done your work.
I was halfway between Whitewater and Delta when
Okay.
I got that call, as best I recall.
Okay. So you've already been up to Grand Junction. You've already done your business in Grand Junction. You're heading back. You got a load behind you because you're hauling a big old trailer, right?
Mhm.
And was that a yes?
Pardon me?
Was that a yes?
That was a yes.
Sorry. We have to have everything yes or no for the record. And despite all that, you're willing to turn around and go back, and they said that's all right, right?
Yes, well,
And the fact of the matter is, they don't even get this check from you until July 11th. You find it on July 2nd. They don't even get the check from you until July 11th. Is that right?
that, I do not recall the exact date that I met with the investigator.
Okay. Well, if law enforcement wrote a report indicating they picked up the check from you on July 11th, would you have any reason to doubt it?
No, I would not.
Nothing further. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Wade, other questions?
Nothing based on that, Judge.
Do you want him under subpoena?
No, he can be released.
Any objection?
No, sir.
All right, you're released from your subpoena, sir, and free to go. Thank you. You're welcome. Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, we're going to ask the court to read the stipulation as to what Sarah Scott or Sarah Sanford would have testified to, as well as to introduce People's Exhibit 512, which is a map, and People's Exhibit 513, which is a 911 call.
Any objection to reading the stipulation and giving the jurors a written copy, at least while I read the stipulation, Mr. Colvin?
I do not object to that procedure, Judge. I also don't object to publishing the 911 call when it's appropriate.
All right, thank
Let's
you.
see, admission of 512 and 513, do you object to the admission at this point?
I'm sorry. I meant to say no objection to that.
No objection to the admission.
And Judge, with the court's and defense counsel's permission, we can publish maybe the map while the court is reading the stipulation, and then afterwards we'll play the 911 call.
That's fine.
People's Exhibits 512 and 513 are both admitted, and then the prosecution, without objection, can publish 512 to their jury while I'm reading the stipulation, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right,
We'll play the
that's
call.
fine, thank you. And then also publish the call right after that, thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, the parties have agreed that if Sarah Sanford were called as a witness, she would testify as set forth in the stipulation. You should consider that stipulated testimony in the same way you consider testimony given here in court, and you should judge it in the same manner in which you judge the testimony of any witness who appeared and testified before you. Sarah would testify that she lives in California currently, but in June and July of 2007, lived with her parents on Foxfire Court in Grand Junction. She worked at a fireworks stand on North Avenue and would drive home by taking Highway 6 and 50 to 23 Road, then north to her parents' home. On the night of July 1st, 2007, she was headed home on that same route. After she turned onto 23 Road, and as she got closer to the Walker SMS building, she observed a vehicle engulfed in flames. She immediately pulled over and called her dad, who advised her to hang up and to call 911. She called 911 at 9:58 p.m., a minute or so after pulling over and calling her dad. She said when she observed the fire, flames were billowing out or shooting out of the car's interior, with the cab of the car completely covered in fire. If the bailiff could collect the written stipulation from our jurors, thank you.
I think one of the jurors has his hand up.
And that is Mr. Woodring or Mr. Spears? All right, thank you, Mr. Spears. None of the monitors are working, or just the one? All right, it may have turned itself off. Sometimes they'll turn themselves off, so maybe if we could, let's see, if I could get the bailiff to hand this remote to Mr. Spears. And Mr. Spears, if you can just hold this close to the monitor and press the red button up on the top there, it may help us. There's another juror, and I'm sorry, is it Miss Massey? All right, Miss Massey.
Can we move that screen more towards, I can't see, even though we have this down here, so for future, we can see, I can't see it.
So you can see both?
Clear, yeah.
Okay, you just need the angle of this bigger screen more towards the jury. Is there any objection? Or maybe we'll just turn it and then we'll see. It's really designed for other people to see too, but it's just a matter of maybe changing the angle just a little bit. Very good. Any problem with that, Mr. Colvin?
I don't think
Where
so,
it is
Judge.
now, we're all good. All right, thank you for letting me know. And did the monitor turn on again? All right, thanks. If we'll just leave the remote up there, and then if we need it again, they're set so they're not supposed to do that, but thanks,
Judge, if we
Mr.
can play the 911
Rubenstein.
call now.
Yes, you can publish exhibit, I'm sorry, what was the number, 513?
513, sir.
All right, thank you. 513 for the record is being published to our jury.
This is Jesse, where's your emergency?
Hi, I'm at the corner of 23 and Logos, and there is a car on fire in the parking lot at the building right here.
23 and Logo?
Yeah, it's in the SMS Walker Building parking lot.
Okay, do you know if it's Logos Court or Drive?
It's Logos Drive.
Okay. And there's a car on fire?
Yeah,
Do you see flames or smoke?
yeah, there's a lot of flames. But there's nobody around that I could see.
Okay. And where's the car at?
It's in the parking lot on the south side of the building.
Okay, you don't see anybody around?
Uh-uh. I'm a little bit past the building, and I pulled over because I was like, what's going on?
All right, we'll send somebody out there, okay?
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
For the record, 513 has been published to the jury. The people's next witness, Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Robert Thomas into the stand.
Feel free to stretch if anybody wishes. Thank you. Good morning, sir. I just need to give you an oath before you testify. If you could approach and be careful of this black cord, please. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you, sir. If you have a seat in the green chair, please, by the microphone. Thank you. You can proceed whenever you're ready, Mr. Rubenstein. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Morning, sir.
Can you please tell the jury your full name and spell your last name?
Robert Thomason, Thomason.
How are you employed?
I'm employed by the City of Grand Junction Fire Department.
How long have you been with EMS and fire?
31 years.
And has all of that been in Grand Junction?
No, sir, it's been in Clifton and Grand Junction.
How long have you been with the Grand Junction Fire Department?
16 years.
What are your duties?
I am a firefighter, paramedic for them.
Okay. Approximately how many fires would you say you've reported to?
Over the years, several hundred.
In addition to putting out fires, is it part of your responsibility to document information?
It is.
And is that for other people's use?
It is for our reporting system that we use for the fire department.
Do you also document things for the arson investigators?
I do, sir.
Are you an arson investigator?
I have been, yes, sir.
Is it part of your job to document what you located for purposes of the arson investigators doing their job?
It is crime scene investigation or crime scene prevention.
On July 1st of 2007, were you dispatched out to a fire?
Yes, sir.
And were you the arson investigator of that fire?
I was one of the arson investigators of that fire.
Were you the primary?
No, sir.
At what time were you dispatched out?
I'd have to look at my report to say the time.
Does 9:58 sound correct?
It was in the evening, yes, sir.
Was that a Sunday night?
I think it was.
Can you describe what you observed?
Well, when we pulled up, we were the first engine on the scene. We pulled up and there was a small red car in an empty parking lot except for that car. And flames were coming out of the interior part of the car.
If the windows are down, or excuse me, if the windows are up and intact, would it have looked like that?
It would not look like that if the windows were gone. If the windows were up, to start with, the fire that was coming out of the windows at that time may have melted or broke the glass.
So if the windows were not broken, still intact, and up, would it have looked like it looked at the time you saw it?
No.
Okay, so somehow the windows were not there, whether they were broken or down
Correct.
or something. Okay.
Correct.
What about the doors? What was
The
the
doors were closed.
What did you do when you arrived?
We arrived, we pulled a 1 3/4 line and extinguished the fire by opening the doors as well and spraying water inside the interior part of the car.
Is an 1 3/4 line a standard line for something like that?
Yes, sir.
Approximately how long does it take to put out a fire like that?
It depends on how it's burning, what's causing it to burn, but we put it out in probably 5 minutes.
And you said you opened the doors as well?
We did, to get all the fire out, to make sure, because as the door shows, fire burns below the door, so we wanted to make sure we got all the fire out inside the passenger compartment of the car.
Do you recall anything significant about the color of the flame?
When you put water on certain metals, it makes a different color of flame, but there's different metals in cars now, so it's pretty common to see different colors of flames when you put water on them.
What colors were the flames here?
White?
And that was not unusual for what you were observing?
No.
How many people are part of this initial crew?
There's 4 people on the engine. There's an engineer, captain, a firefighter, paramedic, and a EMT firefighter.
Okay, can you break down each one of them and what their jobs are?
So the engineer's job is to make sure that we have water to put the fire out. The captain is in charge of the scene. The firefighter and the paramedic's job is to put the fire out.
You said you used an 1 3/4 line. Do you know approximately how much water you used?
Used 125 gallons of water, and the engine carries 500 gallons of water.
How are you able to determine how much water you used?
There's a gauge on the side of the engine that lets us know where the tank is, how much water is left in the tank.
Did you do anything to to determine whether or not there was any fire in the engine compartment or to extinguish any fire in the engine compartment?
We did. We use a tool that we have. It's called a Halligan tool. We punched a hole in the hood because the latch was burned inside the interior part of the car. So we couldn't open it that way. So we punched a hole in the hood, bent the corner of it up to make sure that there was no fire under the hood or in the engine compartment.
Was there any?
There was none.
If a vehicle fire starts as a result of the engine catching fire, would it have looked differently than what you observed?
It would have, for the amount of time that the fire was burning, it would have changed the characteristics of the burn pattern.
When you first saw the vehicle, did it have any license plates on it?
No, there were no license plates on the vehicle or around it.
Were there any people around?
There was nobody that we saw at the time, and we kind of wanted to put the fire out before we were making sure that the area was secured.
Number one goal is
Safety.
stopping the fire,
Yes, sir.
suppressing the fire, I think.
Suppressing is the correct word.
Describe what the vehicle looked like after you put the fire out.
It was a red four-door compact car with most of the burning being burned inside the passenger compartment. There was burn patterns on the doors, so some of it was burned at a higher rate of temperature than on other parts of the car.
What about the dashboard?
There wasn't a dashboard left. It was all burned. It was just the metal.
Steering wheel?
Just the metal parts were left on the interior part of the car, on the front part of the car. And the driver and front passenger, they were totally burned.
What about the windshield?
Windshield was burned, melted inward,
CD, radio area?
was all burned.
Plastic components, or the plastic components in the vehicle?
There are plastic components, but they were all engulfed in the fire or burned.
Was there a difference between how the front looked versus the back?
There was some of the back cushion still left a little bit, but most of it was all consumed in the fire.
Do you recall if you did anything to move the seats, the location of the seats?
We did not.
That's something that you would have not disturbed?
Nope, we wouldn't disturb that.
After you put out the fire, do you know if it was turned over to anybody for scene security?
It was turned over to Mesa County Sheriff's officers to secure the scene until the other investigators came back in the morning.
And were you one of the investigators that participated the next morning?
I was.
Okay, but there was somebody else that was the primary?
Correct.
Okay,
There
and
was
that
two
was
others. Primary was Lincoln Folkers.
Lincoln Folkers, and then
Doug Lucas
Doug
is the
Lucas
other
was
one.
there as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sorry, could you say the name again? Lincoln
Folkers.
Walters, thank you.
And is that spelled F-O-L-K-E-R-S?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, Mr. Folkers and Mr. Lucas were the primaries the next day. You had some other involvement later on July 17th as well with that vehicle, is that right?
That's correct. In the Mesa County Sheriff's Office impound yard.
Vehicle had been towed there at some point prior to you going there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What was the purpose of you going there then?
Was to assist the Mesa County Sheriff's Office in more investigation of the vehicle.
Do you remember what it was you were trying to determine at that point?
We were looking at the car for, my job was to empty the gas tank to see how much fuel was in it, if it was, the fuel had participated in the fire or was burned during the fire, which it was not.
Okay, so it was part of that to see whether or not the gas in the gas tank was related to the cause of the fire?
Correct.
Okay. May I approach, Hunter?
Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm going to hand you what's marked People's Exhibits 514A through E. And for the record, I've previously shown these to Defense Counsel.
Thank you.
Do you recognize those, sir?
Yes, sir.
What are they?
This is all of us working on the car, getting underneath the car. A measuring cup.
And sir, if I could just ask you not to show those to the jury yet until they're in evidence.
Oh,
But
okay.
are those photographs of what you guys were doing out there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Your Honor, at this time I'd move to admit People's Exhibits 514A through E.
Is there any objection, Mr. Coleman?
No, sir.
People's Exhibits 514A through and including E are all admitted.
And Your Honor, if we can publish them at this time.
Any objection?
No, sir.
All right. Exhibits 514A through E can be published to the jury. Thank you.
And so, Mr. Thomason, I'm going to put it on the screen behind you. We'll start with 514A. I'm just going to ask you to sort of describe what we're looking at and what you were doing.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, is that 514A that we're looking at?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what are we looking at?
So we're we're looking at the underneath side of the car. We've jacked it up, put it on jack stands, and emptying the gas tank with that little black catch-all basin that's underneath the car.
Okay, and I see you in the middle there. Who's laying on the ground? Do you recall?
I think that's Lincoln.
And you guys are around a car that's jacked up. Is that the same red Ford Focus that you extinguished the fire on
Yes, sir.
July 1st?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If we could go to 514B. Is that just a close-up?
It's just
view?
a close-up there of it.
Okay.
It's showing that the fuel's leaving the gas tank and into the basin.
Okay. 514C, please. And what is that?
514.
What is that?
This is the container that, both containers, the larger yellow container is to put the fuel in once we get done measuring it in the plastic container.
Okay, so you drain it into the plastic container, measure it, and then pour it into the yellow container?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And 514D?
Showing the container that we're using close up, the smaller container.
Okay. And 514E?
Is after we're done, the car's back in its normal position and the container's there for the sheriff's office.
Did you see any damage underneath the vehicle?
There's a skid plate under there that had some dried weeds on it. It had been cracked.
The skid plate had been cracked, or the
skid-
weeds?
It had been cracked,
The skid plate had been cracked.
and in that crack was dried weeds.
What about, you were looking for damage to the gas tank or the fuel line? Did you observe any of that?
I did not. I didn't get under the car. Lincoln did.
Okay. Okay, thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination, Mr. Coleman, whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Judge.
Yes, sir.
First witness?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Permission to approach the witness?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, I'm showing you what's previously been marked as K through N, as in Nancy. Can you look at those? Do you recognize those photographs, sir?
Yes, sir.
What are those photographs?
These are pictures of the interior and exterior of the car fire.
Okay. Those are actually photographs that were taken that night, right?
That's correct.
And in fact, you were the one that took those photographs, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you did that in part because this this kind of apparently a suspicious fire, would you agree?
That would be correct.
Okay, so your first duty, first obligation, first job is fire suppression, get the fire out, right?
That's correct.
But you are somebody who was experienced in arson investigation, correct?
Yes, sir. I was just learning.
And in 2007, you're starting, but you're highly conscious of it because that's what you're training at right then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So specifically in these photographs, fire's out, your first duty's been fulfilled, but then you shift into, I better start documenting stuff, right?
Correct.
And that's exactly what you did. You took photographs. You actually took a whole bunch of photographs. And photograph K through N is 4 of all of the photographs. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. They fairly accurately depict what you saw that night. Is that right?
Correct.
Judge, at this time, the defense would move to admit K through N.
Any objection to exhibits K through N as in Nancy?
No, sir.
Defendants exhibits K through and including N are all admitted.
Now, you aren't at the time you took those photographs, you're not trying to photograph some particular evidence that explains who set this fire, are you?
No.
I mean, this is just documentation of what you're seeing, right?
Correct.
And you don't necessarily do that on every brush fire out in the boondocks, do you?
No.
Okay. But suspicious fire, let's just preserve the evidence as best we can. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, we've already established first role, first duty is get the fire out, right?
Correct.
But the second that's done, the fire's out, the fire people, and you in particular, are backing off. Let's get this turned over to law enforcement so they can do their part of what's going to happen here, right?
Combination, yes.
Okay. How many gallons of water did you put in this car?
About 125.
Okay. 125 gallons of water into the car, right? We're not talking about...
Into and around the car, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but you're not putting out trees or grass fires around it or anything, right?
No.
I mean, this is in the middle of a dirt parking lot. Car's on fire. All the water's intended to go at or in that car, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the car is very well burnt up, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And all that burning plastic and rubber and paint and all that stuff, that's got a whole bunch of chemicals in it. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Now water goes through that car, and that water that comes out is really nasty black water, right?
Yep.
Okay. But fortunately, you're in the dirt parking lot. I mean, you're not near a river or a creek or anything like that, right?
No, we weren't by any waterway.
Okay. So even though that water coming out of it's black and nasty, it can just go into the ground because there's nothing around there that you need to be worried about being endangered by the water, right?
Correct.
And so that dirt parking lot, that water either evaporates away or it sinks into the ground, all right?
Yep.
Okay. When you pulled the gas out of that car, you did that to see if the gasoline inside the engine or inside the fuel line or inside the fuel tank had started that fire? Was that the purpose of that?
Or just to find out how much was left in there and if it had been breached from the fire.
Okay. And Well, if the fire had breached the fuel line or the gas tank, wouldn't it likely have set the gas on fire that was in either the fuel line or the fuel tank?
If it were able to do that, yes.
Well, if it breached it, that means it opened it, right?
So, yeah, it did not breach the tank.
Right, because if it had, it would have gone up, wouldn't it?
It would have been burning at a higher rate than what it was.
Okay. We're on the same page with that one. So, once you look in there, it's intact, you know that it didn't get breached. Wasn't the purpose to see if that gas in there had started the fire somehow?
No,
No?
no.
Okay. So I'm confused. What was the concern to find out if it had breached the fuel tank or the fuel line?
If it had added to anything that was in there to burn, and it wasn't. It
Okay.
stayed in the tank.
Okay. The fire appeared to you to be mainly focused in the driver's seat area and on the floorboards in front of the driver's seat, right?
Correct.
Okay. The fuel line doesn't run under the driver's seat, does it?
It runs underneath the car.
Right, but it's actually not running directly under the driver's seat under the car, is it?
Not on this car.
No. And so, if the gas line was on fire, it wouldn't have been under the driver's seat floorboard, right?
No.
Okay. How much gas did you pull out of the car?
I don't remember that. I didn't.
Thank you. I have nothing further. Thank you, Judge.
You're welcome. Redirect. Mr. Rubenstein, any questions?
No questions based on that, Your Honor. We have no objection to him being excused.
Any objection to being released from his subpoena, Mr. Colvin?
No, sir.
You're released from your subpoena, free to go, sir. Thank you. Sir. The people's next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people called Doug Lucas to the stand.
Feel free to stretch if anybody wishes.
Okay. What's...
Good morning, sir. Just need to give you an oath before you testify, so be careful of this black cord. Thanks. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you, sir. And then if you have a seat in the green chair, please. Thank you. You can proceed whenever you're ready, Mr. Rubenstein.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please tell the jury your full name and spell your last name?
Douglas Reed Lucas, Lucas.
Are you currently employed?
I am not. I'm retired.
Prior to your retirement, how were you employed?
I was the investigation coordinator for the City of Grand Junction Fire Department.
Were you at some point also an arson investigator?
Yes, sir, I was.
What is your training that qualifies you for that role?
I took numerous classes, training classes through the ATF, some with the FBI, a lot of local on-site classes, and then gained a great deal of experience working with some very seasoned investigators here.
Approximately how many hours of arson investigation courses have you taken?
I would estimate somewhere several hundred.
Approximately how many arson investigations have you participated in some capacity?
I would say probably in excess of 50.
Did many of those hours of training and investigations occur prior to 2007?
Yes, sir, they did.
Have you also supervised others in arson investigation?
Yes, sir, I have.
As part of your job, do you also communicate with others around the state or country to share ideas or information?
Yes, we do.
Your Honor, at this time I'd move to qualify Doug Lucas as an expert in arson investigation.
Mr. Colvin, any objection?
No, sir.
I do find the witness is so qualified as an expert in arson investigation, he'll be allowed to express his opinions in that area. Thank you. You can proceed.
Can I refer to you as investigator?
That's fine.
Okay, so investigator, were you called on July 1st of 2007 and told about a fire?
Yes, sir.
Did you report to that fire that evening?
I responded that next morning.
Did anybody respond with you?
I don't recall at that time. I had other investigators, I believe, that were either there or did come with me at the time. I believe I did bring one investigator, now that I think about it.
And were you the primary arson investigator at that time?
I was the investigation supervisor, that's correct.
You were the investigation supervisor. Who was the primary arson investigator for that fire?
I was the primary.
Okay, was Lincoln Falkers with you?
Yes, sir, he was.
And what was his role?
He was an investigator as well. He worked essentially for me during the investigation phase of the fire.
When you first arrived on scene on July 2nd of 2007, approximately what time was that?
I'd have to look at the reports. It was early morning.
Did you immediately get to work when you got there, or did you need to wait for anything?
I don't recall waiting for anyone. I believe there were other investigators there or other law enforcement officials that we were given a briefing on what had transpired to that point.
Did you ultimately need to wait for a search warrant before you started going through the car?
At that point, I'm not sure if they had acquired a warrant or not. I don't think at that point we actually needed one. It was still in the emergent phase of the operation. But I believe one was acquired later.
So for the jury's understanding, when there's an emergency part of the operation, you don't operate with a warrant, but then the point it gets to an investigation
correct.
phase, then you get a warrant. Ultimately, was a warrant obtained and an arson investigation completed?
As far as I remember, yes.
What did you guys do out there? What was the first thing you did?
We usually get as much information from the people that are on scene, whoever that may be, and then we do a photographic profile of the entire area, including at this point, the car itself and the surrounding area, just for evidentiary purposes, and then begin a systematic examination of the vehicle itself.
Did you direct others from the sheriff's office to remove items for your purposes?
We did remove items from the vehicle, yes.
And were you the ones that actually removed those, or do you have law enforcement remove things that you think are important?
No, actually, we did the removal, and they were logged and placed into evidence accordingly.
On the morning of July 9th, did you then do some further investigation where you removed some items for determining whether or not there was accelerants?
Yeah, there were samples taken, submitted to the CBI.
Can you describe that process?
We take a control sample when it's available, which means taking a sample of either the carpet or some place that we can determine there was no accelerant there, and then we compare that with the sample that we take from the evidentiary portion of it. So we have a sample essentially to compare against.
Where were the samples taken from?
I don't recall all the samples, but I know a number of them were taken from the front seat and the front the front driver's area of the car itself.
May I approach room?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to hand you, it's marked People's Exhibits 508, 509, and 510. Do you recognize those items?
Yeah, they appear to be evidence that we obtained from the scene.
Do they have a card with your writing on it?
Yes, sir, they do.
And does that writing, is the purpose of that for you to document where that item was taken from and what it is?
Yes, it is.
If I could have you look at 508 first, please.
508. All right.
What is item 508?
That is number 6, is that correct? I'm not seeing the 5.
There's a red
sticker
sticker.
on the top.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm sorry, excuse me. Yes, say again, please, I'm sorry.
What is item 508?
That was debris from the front driver's compartment of the car, and it's also listed on the evidence tag itself.
Okay, let me back up just a bit. what you're looking at is a metal can, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, where does that metal can come from?
The cans themselves are sterile cans that we use for investigation for arson purposes, so that any kind of an accelerant or any kind of organic or liquid remains intact, and they're able to sample that based on the fact that the can was sterile to start with and it's completely sealed, so there's no loss of the vapor within the can itself.
So the can is something you supply,
Yes, sir, it is.
and then you read off of the card as to what item that item is inside?
Yes.
Okay, and what is that item that's inside of 508?
Based on the tag, it says debris from the front driver's compartment.
Okay, and that was something that you collected and sealed?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, Your Honor, at this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 508.
Any objection to 508?
No, sir.
People's Exhibit 508 is admitted.
And how about if you could look at 509? What is 509?
It's also a can used for evidence collection that we supplied.
And inside of 509, what is contained?
Debris from the front passenger compartment of the vehicle.
Okay. And when you say front passenger compartment, are you able to tell whether or not that was from the driver's side or the passenger side of the passenger compartment?
This is, based on the information on the tag, the front passenger compartment would be the area that the passenger in the front seat would be occupying at the time. Does that make sense? Is that what you're asking?
I'm not sure. The passenger in the front, meaning not the driver?
Correct.
Okay,
Front seat, passenger side, I guess would be more correct.
okay. And that item you sealed up as well?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 509.
Any objection to 509, Mr. Colvin?
No, sir.
509 is admitted.
And how about 510?
Yes, this is a sample that we collected as well. This is liquid from the cup holder in the front center console of the vehicle.
Okay. And you sealed that, you're looking at like a manila envelope, right?
Correct.
What's inside of that envelope?
Based on this, a cup that we sealed and put in here to be examined for evidence.
How do you seal that?
I'd have to look at it, see it's taped and marked so that no one can
Typically,
tamper
how
with
would
it.
it's not just a cup inside of a manila envelope,
No,
right? It's
no.
inside of a container that you
Yes,
secure?
yes, sir. We do that so that we don't lose any of the sample itself, and so it's not allowed to vaporize any more than it already has.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 510.
Any objection? People's 510 is admitted without objection.
Did you also put any melted material into a carryall?
I don't recall it. I'd have to refer to the report, sir.
Would doing that refresh your memory?
I'm sorry?
Would doing that refresh your memory?
Yes, it would.
For the record, this is pages 11,995 through 12,042. It's all right, this is your entire report, I'm not sure what you did.
Excuse me for the time. I need to take a longer look. Okay, I believe this is it. Do I have a chance to read this before
Take your time.
I apologize again?
I certainly don't mind him refreshing. Could you let me know what page he used specifically?
I'm sorry?
He's done.
Investigator, if you could just, once you find the page that refreshes your memory, if you could just let us know, there's some numbers down on the bottom corner. If you could just
Okay.
let us know what page it was on that you found what you were refreshing your memory with. Should be page numbers in the bottom right corner.
The only reports that I'm finding are in reference to another part of the investigation we did. I didn't find anything in reference to what you asked, sir.
Okay. Do you recall bringing some items back, including a pair of glasses that was melted and just a few other items, very few items of evidentiary value inside?
Yes, we did remove numerous items that were, most of them were melted, some of them were unrecognizable based on the amount of heat that they acquired during the fire.
And other than the items that you were testing for accelerant, would it be fair to say that you didn't find any items in the cavity of the vehicle of evidentiary value, but rather law enforcement collected those ultimately later?
Correct. Those were given to law enforcement, and they in turn processed those as they needed to.
Okay. I want to very briefly talk about your opinion of the fire, and I'll talk to Investigator Falkers about the photos later. But when you arrived on scene, what was the condition of the doors?
The doors, when I arrived myself, were closed.
And is it something that you, as part of your investigation, look at as to whether or not the windows were up or down?
Yeah, we always make note of that, or try to. The condition of the windows, the doors, it could help determine the length of or intensity of the fire.
Now, in a case like this, the windows themselves were blown out in some fashion, either by fire or water or something, right?
Yes, when we got there, they were not intact.
Is there a way that you determine whether or not the window was rolled up?
There are ways to determine. I'm not exactly sure what process we used at that point. A lot of times we're able to find the location of the door glass itself and whether or not it was on the inside or the exterior of the vehicle. And that tells us a lot as to, and the condition of the glass as well, based on the fact that glass, when subject to extreme heat, takes different forms.
Do you look to see the casing that holds the window? Do you look to see the position that is in, whether or not that is up or down?
Correct. That's a big telltale sign there.
Okay. So if a person was wanting to start a fire and get away before anybody saw that they had started the fire, are there things that they can do to slow down how quickly the fire takes over the vehicle?
Yes, there are.
What sorts of things are there?
Well, the fact that the doors were closed, that limits the amount of available oxygen for the fire, and once it can actually slow the process somewhat, and the windows being up and intact at the time can also slow the progress of the fire. Fire needs a certain amount of oxygen to combust at a rapid pace, and without that amount of oxygen available, a lot of times the fire will, for lack of a better term, smolder or burn at a lesser degree up until the point that one of those windows or the doors are breached, that oxygen is introduced, and at that point the fire accelerates rapidly based on the heat of the fire inside the vehicle and the fact that the components of the car itself have been preheated and combust rather rapidly.
What about the amount of accelerant used?
In reference to what, sir?
how quickly a fire grows?
Higher-end fuels like gasoline tend to burn very rapidly. Lower-end fuels such as diesel fuel and those types burn at a lower rate until they heat to a certain degree, and then they burn rapid, but they're a slow onset.
Will the quantity, like if you poured gasoline all over it, I mean, I think naturally people who have, started a bonfire or something else by putting gasoline on it know it can go up, but is
Right.
that something that, what about how much it's spread out?
That can affect the rate of the fire as well, how much was used, where it was used, and those sort of things that will make a difference.
Were you able to, from looking at this fire, determine what the location of the origin of the fire was?
Based on the examination that we did, we concluded that the fire most likely began in the driver's compartment, seat, or floor area of the vehicle, based on the total examination of the vehicle itself.
Okay, and that was based on a lot of burn
True,
patterns?
based on fire behavior, fire dynamics, things that are very common in automobile fires.
The factors that you talked about that could slow down the growth of the fire, were those present in this case?
I believe they were, yes.
Would it be within the realm of possibility that at the point, if hypothetically somebody reported this fire at the time they called in to report the fire, that it was already billowing out the windows and completely engulfed, would it be within the realm of possibility, in your opinion, that it could have been set 15 minutes or longer earlier, 15 minutes or longer prior to that, under the conditions that you observed?
It's entirely possible, yes.
Would it be fair to say that it's very difficult to date those things because there's too many factors?
Yeah, there are too many determining factors to pinpoint that exactly.
But it's certainly within the realm of what could have happened.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions at this time.
Mr. Coleman, cross-examination, please.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. So previously, we had the opportunity to talk, you and I, over the phone. Is that, or actually it was at my office, right?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And previously, one of the things you told us was that it was really hard to determine any kind of time frame on how long this fire burned. Is that right?
It's true, yes.
And prosecution just asked you some questions about, could closed doors and closed windows slow this down, right?
Yes,
And could the amount of gasoline, et cetera, other things, could those slow down the fire, right?
yeah, they all dictate a certain degree of time frame.
But the reality is, unless you're able to reconstruct the circumstances in which this fire was set with absolute accuracy, there's really no way to know how long it would have taken other than some broad parameters. Is that
That's
a fair
correct. These are
statement?
just assumptions based on training and experience.
Okay. So you just said it's plausible it took 15 minutes. It burned for 15 minutes, right?
Yes, sir.
But it's also plausible it burned for 14 minutes, right?
True, yes,
And
it
it's
could have.
plausible it burned for 16 minutes, right?
Absolutely.
And that, and we could keep playing that game, going another minute either way, and at some point it stops being plausible, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So on the upper end, what's the longest plausible time frame, would you say?
I really couldn't, I can't answer that correctly. It's too hard to say. There's too many variables involved to be that accurate. I would assume that it was obviously less than an hour. It couldn't have burned too awful long based on the amount of damage to the vehicle itself.
Okay. And what's the bottom?
I suppose, and this is only a guess on my part, it could have been as little as, 10 minutes. It had to have time to develop and do the amount of damage it did, so it had to have been burning for a relatively, short period of time. I would say 10 minutes would be the bottom, and that's just an estimate on my part.
Okay. Now, ten minutes is the bottom?
Yeah, I would say it would, and this is just my opinion, that it had burned for at least 10 minutes based on the degree of damage with inside and outside the vehicle. But
Okay.
that's a total estimate on my part. there's nothing to directly obtain that information from.
Well, you testified previously, and we just talked about how previously we've talked, but you've also testified previously, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the last time you were in this courtroom, you were testifying, correct?
Correct?
After having been sworn to tell the truth, et cetera, right?
Yes, sir.
You were qualified as an expert witness at that time, is
Yes,
that
sir.
right? And you were asked at that time, would it be fair to say, you were asked by Mr. Rubenstein, at page 253 of the transcript, would it be fair to say that it was certainly would it be fair to say that it is certainly within the realm of possibility that the fire was started 15 minutes earlier?
Yes.
And your answer at that time was, it would be very difficult to determine that, but I would assume it probably burned 5 to 10 minutes, just strictly based on the impressions that we got when we arrived.
Yeah, I would say probably 10 minutes would be a bottom line.
Okay, last time you said 5 to 10, though.
Yes. Well, like I said, it's not an exact science. They're just estimations.
Okay. Have you talked with, sorry. Have you talked to prosecution since your last testimony?
Just briefly in the hallway this morning, just to say hi.
Okay. Well, this 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes now is what you think is probably the bottom, right?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, but it's important for everyone to understand, without knowing all the variables, that isn't something you're going to say is absolutely for certain, right?
No, I don't think anyone could be that certain.
Okay. Why was it the last time you testified that 5 to 10 sounded like a plausible bottom end, and now it's
Well-
10?
Well, the 10-minute factor, like I mentioned this time, would be a reasonable amount of time. It could have possibly burned for 5 minutes if somebody really wanted it to burn fast and it used a lot of accelerant. It may have burned slightly shorter than the 10-minute period, but I would say 10 minutes would be just a rough estimate. I mean, It could have been 5, it could have been 17. I really don't know.
Sure. And I want to make sure I'm not missing something. Are we talking about when we say how long it burned, we're talking about from the time flame starts, the match is dropped, metaphorically.
Okay?
Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, from the onset of the fire, when the initial ignition happened,
Okay.
whatever that may be.
And so necessarily, if 10 minutes is right, and I understand you don't know that.
That's correct.
That's what you've been careful to explain to us, right? But if that 10 minutes is correct, we're talking about the 7 minutes from the time the car is seen on fire until fire department puts it out.
Okay? And what are you asking? I'm sorry?
That 10 minutes, your estimate, right? That includes 7 minutes from the time the car is seen until the car is put out. That's right?
I think I understand. Yes, I think that's correct. I'm understanding your question correctly.
Yeah, that was a poor way to word it. Now that
I'm not real sure I understand what you're asking.
Let me try it again.
All right,
I'll try and do it in English this time.
great. I do better that way.
10 minutes, that is from match being dropped to fire being out, right?
Yes, until they were on scene and actually began the extinguishment process.
Wait, sorry. Say that last part.
The 10 minutes would be until they were on scene and began the extinguishment process, when they actually began to put the fire out.
So the 10 minutes would be match drop till fire department arrives, not fire out.
Not necessarily. I mean, it's not going to go out and I don't know what the time difference was from the time it was reported until the first engine company arrived. I don't have those numbers.
I understand. But presumably, there's a period of time where they're putting water on it before it's out, right?
Yeah, it doesn't go out instantaneous.
Okay.
No, it takes a period of time.
So whatever that time frame is, you're just saying match, and I realize we don't really know if a match was dropped, but
Correct.
the ignition happens. That's probably a better way to put it. From the ignition happening till fire department's on scene, that would be what you're trying to estimate with all the variables at 10 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you were the person you were in charge of the arson investigations back then, right?
For the fire department, yes, sir.
Okay. And you were the person who had the most experience at that time, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were the person who'd had the most classes at that time, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Folkers was also an arson investigator and an arson investigator that worked under your supervision, correct?
That's correct.
And he was a guy you relied upon, right?
Yes, he's a very competent individual.
Yeah, you characterized him previously as one of your top guys, I think was what
He was
you
one of the
said.
better investigators on the team at that point, yes.
Part of being an arson investigator is that you write a report about your arson investigation, right?
That's a very critical part of what we do, yes, sir.
I mean, that report's generated for purposes of law enforcement, it's generated for purposes of prosecution, potentially if criminal charges are forthcoming, et cetera, right?
That's correct.
And so, though you're a firefighter or employed as a firefighter, you have a very definitive law enforcement role as an arson investigator, right?
And you're referring to myself?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wasn't a firefighter at that point. I did strictly fire investigations, if that's what you're asking.
I didn't mean to mischaracterize your employment. Weren't you employed by the Grand Junction Fire Department, or were you paid by the Sheriff's Department?
No, the Grand Junction Fire Department.
Okay. That's what I was trying to get
Oh,
at.
yes,
is
sir.
that You're an employee of the fire department, right?
Yes, sir.
But you obviously have a major law enforcement investigation component to your job at that time, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in that capacity, the generation of the report and the follow-through on the investigation, doing what needs to be done to generate that report, that's your responsibility, right?
Yes, sir, it is.
So one of the things you talked about doing was how you went out or one of the things that you normally do would be to interview people who were on scene. Is that right?
Yes, we try to talk to everyone we can.
And in fact, you did try to do that in this case, correct?
I'm assuming we did. It's been a long time. I can't recollect for sure, but yes, we talked to everyone that was available at the time, yes.
Okay. So you went out and interviewed a lady by the name of Sarah Sanford or Sarah Scott, is that correct?
I believe we did. I believe we did do an interview with her, yes.
And you talked to the firefighters that were on scene that actually responded to the fire, is that correct?
Yes, that's critical to talk with them. They were the first ones there. They have basically the most information at that point to talk about.
But bottom line is, other than the lady that called 911 and the firefighters, one of the things you're doing when you're engaged in that document prosecution gave you is in fact your fire the work that you did, is that right?
It should include everything, yes, sir.
Okay, so it includes all your reports, all the photographs, all the rest of it, right?
Yes, sir.
The only thing not included in that would be the results of scientific testing that was done on the stuff in the cans and everything else you seized, right?
That's correct.
Because after you seize those, by seize, I mean you take them, after you seize those physical evidence things, they get handed over to law enforcement, right?
Yes, there's a chain of custody that we adhere to.
And law enforcement then turns it over to some scientist for scientific testing, is that correct?
They were submitted for examination to the CBI, I believe.
Okay. And do you, as the fire investigator, get the results of those, of that scientific testing?
Oftentimes we do. It depends on the seriousness of the case and other things, obviously, but most of the time we would be privy to that information as well.
And did you get it in this case?
I don't recall.
Okay. That, whether you did or didn't, that the results of the scientific testing didn't inform your opinion as to the fact that this was likely a human-caused fire, is that correct?
That would lead to that determination, yes.
I think we missed each other on that one. You didn't need scientific testing of the evidence to tell you that this was most likely a human-caused fire. Is that true?
We based that information just strictly on the burn patterns and the degree of damage to the vehicle. At that point, it was just an estimate that that's exactly where we think it started, but we can't be sure obviously without further testing and analysis of the evidence collected.
Okay.
That just helps to solidify that conclusion.
But the one thing that was pretty clear to you as an experienced fire investigator is this fire started on the floorboard, driver's side, floorboard, driver's seat area of the driver's side. Is that correct?
Yes, based on our training and experience, we believe that's exactly where it did start.
And I understand it's based on your training and experience, but there's also some specific observations you made that were significant on that, such as the burn patterns on the doors, right?
That's correct.
The burn patterns on the doors were much more significant on the driver's side than they are on the passenger side, correct?
This is correct.
Okay. And the damage to the interior of the car is most significant towards the front of the car than to the back of the car. And I'm trying to refer to the passenger compartment area.
Yes, in reference to the passenger compartment, the fire appeared to have started in the front as opposed to the back.
Okay. So front damage, driver's side damage, ipso facto, started in the driver's seat area, right?
We assume that, yes.
Okay. Let's talk for a second about splash patterns, okay?
About what, sir?
Splash patterns?
Splash patterns?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
I'm sorry.
That's a term of art used by arson investigators. Is that correct?
It is a term we use, yes.
And would you explain what a splash pattern is for us?
Those are patterns that are developed when an accelerant is used to ignite a fire. When liquid accelerant is introduced, it's a typical liquid, and those splash patterns will burn oftentimes more intensely in the area where the accelerant was, as opposed to the additional areas around that. And again, it's not an exact science, but it's one tool in the toolbox, if you will.
Okay.
I was just going to let you know it's close to the lunch
Oh.
hour, given our reduced lunch hour times.
I'm sorry,
I don't
Judge.
want to go too far in if we don't have to, but
I was just starting something. This is a good time.
it's a
So-
good time. Thank you so much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take our lunch recess at this time. Please remember all the instructions for the recesses. We'll start back in the courtroom at 1 o'clock. If you'll please report back to the jury commissioner's office on the third floor. If you'll work with the bailiff on what time to report back, hopefully. All right, thank you. Please rise for our jury. And sir, if you could be back at 1 o'clock for us, please. Mr. Lucas, you're free to go, and if you'll just be back at 1 o'clock.
At 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock. Thank you. For the record, our jury has left the courtroom. I did want to make a record about the Sarah Sanford stipulation. The bailiff collected the written